I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for starting your Monday with us. We are going to begin this morning and this week in Japan, where President Trump arrived just a few hours ago. He is set to meet with several Japanese leaders before heading to South Korea on Thursday.
On the calendar there, President Trump's highly anticipated meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Tensions between the world's two largest economies have risen since the president threatened an additional 100% tariff on Chinese goods. That was in response to Chinese curbs on rare earth exports. Now the Trump administration appears hopeful the two sides will make a critical deal in the trade war. In a few minutes, we are going to talk with Investopedia's editor-in-chief, Caleb Silver, for more on that possible trade deal. Let's begin, though, with NBC News Washington correspondent Alice Barr. Alice, good morning.
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. President Trump has already been meeting this morning with Japan's emperor, at the Imperial Palace before talks later with the country's first female prime minister. The trade relationship between the U.S. and China, though, is really taking center stage because it's arguably the most important and most likely to impact prices for American consumers. So word of a framework for a trade deal is welcome news. President Trump arriving in Japan this morning for the second leg of his Asia tour. The trip set to culminate in a meeting Thursday in South Korea with Chinese President Xi Jinping amid an apparent breakthrough in high-stakes trade talks.
I think we're going to have a good deal with China, and they want to make a deal.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on NBC's Meet the Press announcing a framework for a trade deal to avoid President Trump's threatened 100% tariff increase on Chinese imports to the U.S.
I believe we've reached a very substantial framework that will avoid that and allow us to discuss many other things with the Chinese.
Inking a deal would help to wind down the trade war between the world's two biggest economies, while at the same time tensions ratcheting up with one of America's closest allies.
Canada has been ripping us off for a long time. One of the most difficult countries to deal with has been Canada.
President Trump doubling down on slapping an additional 10% tariff on goods coming in from Canada because of an anti-tariff Government of Ontario TV ad featuring segments edited from a 1987 radio address by President Reagan.
America's jobs and growth are at stake.
The ad ran during the World Series over the weekend, but Ontario's premier says it will stop today. No meeting over the weekend when Canada's Prime Minister and President Trump were both in Malaysia for a trade summit, leaving a mixed picture on trade as American businesses and consumers wait for the impact on prices at home. While keeping Canada at arm's length, at least for now, President Trump left the door open to potentially meeting with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un and said he would maybe even extend his trip in order to accommodate that. He also said that he's preparing to visit China's President Xi in Beijing next year and would host Xi at the White House or Mar-a-Lago sometime in the future. Savannah, Joe.
All right, Alice, thank you so much.
Now let's bring in Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver to break down the potential economic impact of President Trump's high-stakes Asia trip. Caleb, good morning. So Mr. Trump and Xi Jinping, China's president, meet this week. They're expected to announce a deal that is going to avert that 100% tariff, we hope. That is set to take effect as of now, though, on November 1st, which is just later this week. Some of the core issues in the negotiations, things like access to rare earth minerals, China's role in the fentanyl trade. What are the outlines of this deal so far? How do we expect this to go?
Yeah, there's that. There's potentially a delay on those rare earth mineral taxes or tariffs that China is going to put in place, but also a potential guarantee from China that it'll buy soybeans from the United States. So think about what we have in the mix here. Rare earth minerals on one side, soybean purchases on the other, semiconductors in the middle of all of it. So this could be substantial. The Treasury Secretary is saying that 100% tariffs on China could be off the table or at least delayed a year. That's plenty of room for negotiation there. That's a pretty big deal, both for farmers here in the U.S., but also for importers of Chinese goods here in America.
Let's talk more about soybeans. I come from Minnesota, which is soybean country, and China has not bought any this year. That's hurting these farmers. A lot of them actually voted for President Trump. So if we do see a deal here, what kind of relief could that provide to any of those farmers?
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. And you've seen the negotiations going on with Argentina and the purchases of soybeans from America there. So it's obviously a huge commodity that's very important to farmers here in the United States. But China needs it very much as well. They have a growing population, so it's obviously a huge deal in the mix of all of this. But the rare earth minerals are a big part of their sticking point that really brought on the 100% tariffs when China announced the fact that it was going to be doing these broad tariffs on these rare earth minerals. That actually brought the 100% tariff threat from President Trump. So if that's off the table, we have purchases of soybeans, we have the export of rare earth minerals. That's a very good framework for a deal.
Let's talk Canada. We just heard their talks have sort of stalled. There was much to be said about this ad, this anti-tariff ad, using a snippet of a speech from Ronald Reagan that the president was not happy about, threatened this additional 10% tariff on Canadian goods because of that. Do we know which goods that would affect and where things stand?
Well, already it's timber. That's a big export from Canada. It's oil. Some oil products come out of Canada as well, but also frozen potatoes. A lot of frozen vegetables come from Canada into the United States. It's one of our three biggest trading partners, so obviously a lot in the balance there, but it doesn't look like we're anywhere closer to a deal because of the president's reaction to that ad using that Ronald Reagan soundbite from, I don't know, 40 years ago.
Right. A big talker over the weekend, but perplexing, I think, to a lot of folks. Let's continue our tour around the world. Let's go to India. We're close to a deal there. We've had, a 50% tariff on goods exported to the U.S. from there. What would be the key points of this deal?
Yeah, well, there's been talk and reports of that being reduced to 15 to 16%, down from 50. So textiles, obviously, a huge export from India into the United States, but also various minerals and spices that are important to the global food trade, as well as obviously oil and machinery parts. Those come from India as well, but also a lot of labor that the United States has, manufacturers have moved from China, has moved to India, Vietnam, and other places. That could open the door to a broader negotiation there. A big sticking point, though, is India has to stop purchasing oil from Russia. That was one of the reasons that those tariffs were so aggressive for the United States. It looks like President Modi has said that they will do that.
All right, Caleb Silver, thank you very much.
Another big story, Jamaica is bracing for what could be a life-threatening storm. Overnight, Hurricane Melissa intensified, becoming a Category 5 hurricane. It's now taking aim at the island, packing sustained winds of 160 miles an hour. Jamaican officials issued mandatory evacuations for parts of the island. They're giving a stark warning. Some communities may not survive the catastrophic flash floods. The latest update from the National Hurricane Center says 30 inches of rain are possible for the island nation. The storm's already killed 4 people along its slow path through the Caribbean. NBC News correspondent George Solis has the latest from Jamaica.
Good morning. The winds and the rain starting to intensify. Melissa, now a Category 5 storm, still slowly making its way here to Jamaica. No one really certain where the landfall will be yet. Officials' messaging is very clear. This is a time for visitors and for locals to hunker down, help one another, and prepare for what could be a once-in-a-generation storm. Now, yesterday we toured many areas, some of those areas prone to flooding. Officials there clearing beaches, some locals still saying they are going to ride out this storm, even with the messaging clear. There are also mandatory evacuations in place for some of these low-lying areas where these communities are expected to flood. In one particular community, buses were staged. Not many people getting on, except one person that decided to leave, a lupus patient, because she simply didn't want to take the chance. Now, we know Melissa could be a historic storm. It's already wreaked havoc in other parts of the Caribbean. We know it's responsible for at least 1 death in the Dominican Republic, 3 in Haiti. Officials briefing daily since this storm has been approaching, warning the public that they need to make those last-minute preparations now. Now, a lot of stores have closed down. There was one that was still open for anyone that needed to get those last-minute supplies. Carts have been full, some shelves also barren, but officials saying they have those supplies in place once this storm passes. We're talking not just food and water, but also ways to get communications and utilities. Vandalism was also a big concern for officials, and they are asking people, of course, not right now, but to just keep a vigilant eye once this storm passing for any signs of looting or any signs of vandalism. Now, again, we're looking at the potential for some catastrophic rain, which could mean a lot of flooding. It could mean a lot of power outages for extended periods of time. So at this point, it really is almost unsafe to be out if you don't have a plan in place to shelter as this storm passes. The expectation, the hope is that the storm begins to accelerate once it makes landfall. But if this ends up lingering here, it could obviously be a very historic event. Officials saying they have weathered storms before, but this could obviously be a very different ballgame. And one final note, the shelters here across the island, all of them open, none full yet, but officials expect that could change in the coming hours. Back to you.
All right, George, thank you.
Well, let's get the up-to-date track for Hurricane Melissa, plus some other forecast details from meteorologist Andrea Romero.
Yeah, she joins us with the Morning News Now weather. Andrea, good morning.
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. And Hurricane Melissa continues to move slowly south of Jamaica. It intensified this weekend rapidly. It intensified in a period of 18 hours, over 70 miles per hour, to become that major category storm. And today, it's a monster. We're talking about a Category 5 hurricane that's located about 130 miles southwest of Kingston, Jamaica. It's packing winds of 160 miles per hour. And like I said, it's moving slowly towards the west at around 3 miles per hour. These are the watches and warnings we have up currently. We have a hurricane warning for Jamaica, for eastern Cuba, and we also have a tropical storm warning for parts of Haiti. And now we also have hurricane watches that are up for the Bahamas as well as Turks and Caicos. So this is what we're expecting as we track Melissa. Life-threatening rainfall locally up to 40 inches, moving over Jamaica. Relentless and destructive wind gusts of over 100 miles per hour. Tomorrow, Melissa will take aim on Cuba, and the outer bands of the storm will also be brushing parts of Haiti. And then by Wednesday, it should accelerate, and some of its impacts will be felt in the Bahamas and even in Turks and Caicos. And of course, the rainfall is what we're so worried about in Jamaica. We're talking about still probably close to 30 inches of rainfall that can fall in Mandeville, also in Bull Savannah, close to 19 inches. So we're talking about catastrophic flooding and landslides that will be impacting Jamaica. And then we have also the damaging winds, wind gusts of 100 miles per hour that will be hitting that area. Winds will contribute to storm surge impacts, possibly 13 feet of storm surge is expected along the southern coast of Jamaica. As we track Melissa, we see as it moves tonight into tomorrow over Jamaica, then tomorrow night into Wednesday, we're talking about an impact over Cuba still as a major hurricane. And then after that, it'll move into the Atlantic. Fortunately for the East Coast, we're not expecting a direct impact here in Bermuda. Once again, it seems like that storm might get hit by this hurricane. Looking at our national forecast, we do have some mountain snow over the northern Rockies. We also have warm temperatures along the southwest, along the western coast, heavy rain. We have the chance of some flooding, perhaps along the Space Coast in Florida, in the southeast. And then, of course, we have those chilly temperatures in the northeast that we're waking up to. So
fall is here.
It's a little bit of everything. Exactly.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you
Andrea.
so much. See you in a little bit.
The consequences of the government shutdown are threatening to impact more Americans as it enters day number 27. The Senate reconvenes at the Capitol this afternoon, but lawmakers are no closer to a deal. Republicans' stopgap funding measure failed again to get through the Senate last week, a 12th time it has failed now. Democrats also sank a separate Republican-backed bill to pay essential federal workers who continue to work during the shutdown.
Meanwhile, the House still out of session after Speaker Mike Johnson canceled all votes today. It hasn't held a vote in over a month and will likely remain out of session all week unless the Senate reaches a deal to reopen the government.
For more on how the shutdown is being felt across the country, let's bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona. Mel, so we are still a month away or so from Thanksgiving, but Trump administration officials are already warning about a potential holiday travel meltdown if the government does not reopen. Imagine TSA agents still aren't getting paid, the air traffic control issues. I mean, just how bad right now is the situation at airports?
Yeah, good morning, guys. We are starting to see some travel delays at airports. Just yesterday alone, for example, 8,000 flights were delayed. And of the uptick we've seen recently, 53% of those are related to staffing shortages, compared to just 5% back in February that were related to staffing shortages. So this is starting to become a problem. It's going to become even more of a problem, potentially starting tomorrow. That is when air traffic controllers are set to miss their first full paycheck. And so what's happening is air traffic controllers, instead of coming in and working without pay, they're calling in sick. Some of them are picking up extra jobs to make ends meet. There are some food bank donations being set up specifically for air traffic controllers. But the longer this goes on, the more delays we're going to see. Just take a listen to Sean Duffy, the Transportation Secretary, talking about this yesterday.
Just yesterday, Maria, we had 22 staffing triggers. That's one of the highest that we've seen in the system since the shutdown began. And that's a sign that the controllers are wearing thin. As we get to Monday, tomorrow, Tuesday, and Wednesday, that you're going to see more staffing shortages in towers, which means you're going to see more delays, more cancellations, and then you see more Americans frustrated at Democrats, and they'll say, open up the government, enough is enough.
And of course, if this does drag on to Thanksgiving, that is such a huge travel holiday. So there's a lot of concern about the delays, the meltdown, as you put it, that could ensue. But hopefully Congress gets this solved before then. Just right now, there is no end in sight.
Oof, my gosh, I can't imagine this over Thanksgiving. Mel, also in the coming days, more than 40 million low-income Americans who just receive food assistance through SNAP will either get less help or potentially stop receiving those benefits. Here's something, though. Congress has already set aside billions of dollars to help if something like this were to happen. Why are they not using it?
So the USDA put out a memo saying they don't believe it would be legal for them to use those funds in this situation because those funds are supposed to be for emergencies like a disaster. And according to this memo, they said this was a manufactured crisis by Democrats. And so essentially they put the blame solely on Democrats, said Democrats have the power to end this immediately by voting to reopen the government. Of course, Democrats are crying foul here, saying that the White House is trying to maximize the pain as much as possible to try to force Democrats to the table. But the reality is, after this week, there's going to be millions of Americans who can no longer afford to get their food, get their groceries. This is a program that over 40 million Americans rely on. So this is becoming very quickly a dire situation for many Americans.
And it's going to have a bipartisan impact. I mean, it's going to hit red states, blue states, rural areas, big cities. Are there any state governments that are looking at this and trying to figure out a way to step in and fill the gap?
There are some states that are trying to figure out how they can make this program work. Louisiana, Vermont, Virginia, officials in all of those states, for example, have said that they're going to try to pay their own way to these SNAP benefits. However, there's a lot of questions about whether they have enough money to do that. These are very expensive programs. There's also questions about whether they will be reimbursed by the federal government, especially given that memo that I just outlined for you. But other states are trying to find other ways to help people out. California, for example, they're deploying the National Guard to help with food distribution. And in Arkansas, they're recommending that people start really stocking up on non-perishable goods in case this goes on for a long time.
Mel, yet another impact to discuss here, military families. Lawmakers are actually facing a deadline to try to find a way to keep covering those paychecks at the end of this month. Of course, that's just later this week. It comes out after last week, the Pentagon confirmed that it had accepted an anonymous $130 million donation to pay troops their salaries and their benefits during this shutdown. What is the latest on that?
Well, $130, while $1 million is a noble donation, it really is only a drop in the bucket compared to what it actually costs to fund the troops. You're talking about just one pay period. That's billions of dollars in order to cover the salaries for members of the military. So there's a lot of uncertainty about whether they will get paid at this next pay period. The Trump administration did move money around to ensure that they got their last paycheck October 15th, despite it being a shutdown. The question is whether Congress is going to step up to the plate and try to pass a bill that would pay the military as well as federal workers. They tried passing a bill last week that would only pay workers who are actively working. Now there's a question about whether they're going to try to combine their efforts with a Democratic bill that would also pay furloughed workers. Still unclear whether that will succeed, but that's something we're watching very closely on Capitol Hill this week, guys.
Busy week ahead for you, Mel. Thank you so much.
Well, this morning, investigators are looking for a potential motive in a mass shooting during homecoming festivities at one of the first historically black colleges in the U.S. over the weekend. Authorities say one person was killed, at least 6 others were wounded in a shooting at Lincoln University on Saturday night. That's about 50 miles west of Philadelphia. Yesterday, the victim was identified as 25-year-old Jawan Jeffers. The university police chief said the shooting began after a football game when crowds were gathering for a tailgate. The suspect was taken into custody after the shooting and charged with carrying a concealed firearm without a license.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.